Welcome, everybody, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today, we're talking with Ashley and Kyrstin, the founders of Boba Studios and the creators of Squirrely Roo Rabbit, about creating wholesome video games and the importance of more voices in game development.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to speak with industry experts about their areas of expertise, as well as directly hear their origin stories of breaking into games. In the first half of the episode, we do a little interview, and in the second half, you get to actually ask questions, your questions, to the creators. I am your host, as always, Willem Delventhal, the founder of the Indie Game Academy and the Wizard of Joy. And joining me today is Ashley Gouchait and Kyrstin. I can't read my own handwriting. Kyrstin, what was your last name again for us?
Kyrstin Kutzi.
Kutzi, thank you so much. Welcome so much to the show. It is lovely to have you on. Ashley and Kyrstin created the studio Boba Studios and the game Squirrely Roo Rabbit, which is this adorable, wholesome, rabbit-filled game that they are currently kickstarting and building plushies for. Ashley and Kyrstin, welcome to the show. What are you having for lunch today?
Thank you so much. I feel like we both currently have water, but, after the show, we'll probably get lunch. We made pesto the other day, and so that was, our first time making it ourselves, and it turned out really well, so
amazing.
Excited to eat more of it.
Okay. What are you putting the pesto on?
The other day, we put it on, rigatoni, but, I don't know what we're going to do today. We'll find out.
Amazing. That sounds exciting. Pesto is one of those, just always good condiments. I guess it's a condiment.
Yeah.
You can put it on basically anything, and it's great. Slather it on some bread, and I'll put it in some pasta, whatever you can come up with.
Absolutely.
Probably good in cereal.
Yeah, probably. It's one of those things, too, that it's, so easy to access, because you just need one basil plant,
Right.
and then it's, half of your, room the next day, so...
Yeah. Although we have been battling slugs and other insects on our basil. I don't know if you have that problem.
No, we haven't.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll do a gardening episode next. We'll bring you back for that one, and we'll talk about basil gardening. But this podcast is, of course, about making video games. So before anything else, our first question to get the ball rolling is just to ask your origin story. So tell us how the two of you got into games and how Squirrely Roo Rabbit and Boba Studios got started.
Awesome. Do you want to take that?
Sure. So we we met at the Maryland Institute College of Art, both as undergrad students studying game design. My degree is actually in animation, so I did game design kind of as a minor. And we met through classes there. And we actually started on Squirrely Roo Rabbit as a thesis project. First in Ashley's year because she's a year older than me, and then that continued into mine.
Oh. Squirrely Roo was it was a really cool project because I double majored, and so because we love story-based games, but also because I didn't really want to do two thesis projects. Spoiler alert, I did, but we were let's start and do a story game, and try to get that to fit into both. And Squirrely Roo, we took the idea behind the first game we ever made together, which was a couple years earlier, that it was color based, and the Squirrely Roo is more true to color mixing, but the original game was about whether a color was warm versus cold, and it was kind of, I don't know, a Studio Ghibli inspired, you travel through this forest and you meet creatures that are warm or cold, and you learn to use your magic based on which color your magic matched the animals, which you kind of can see how that later transformed in the Squirrely Roo's color matching thing.
That's adorable. I love there's a lot of people who wind up building stuff out of college. They start with something because they're kind of forced to start with something, and then they realize hey, actually this is pretty great, and they continue the education, and also they pursue the game, which obviously you two are, because you're currently running a Kickstarter, which we'll talk about more in a moment. This episode will go live right at the middle mark of the Kickstarter. There's going to be a link down below. So I will make the first mention. Go and support Squirrely Roo Rabbit on Kickstarter. So tell us about the game itself, though. I would love to paint a picture for the listener of what this game is. How does it play? Tell us a little bit more.
All right.
Yeah, So Squirrely Rabbit is a 2.5D puzzle adventure game based on color theory. So what that means is kind of designed to look like a pop-up book in the way that the world is 3D, but many of the elements in it are 2D, such as the characters or some of the background elements. And the color mixing kind of comes in where you can kind of take primary colors to create secondary colors, and then kind of use those to interact with the environment and other characters.
Yeah, and you're playing as Squirrely Roo, who lives in a forest where like a group of chameleons come in and they like swap all the colors of all the animals because they can change their colors too, and like they kind of want people to understand that, and so that causes like a lot of confusion in their world, and so Squirrely Roo teams up with chameleon outcast Cammy to track down the Chameleon King and get him like to change the colors back, and so those are actually the two characters that are going to be in our Kickstarter when we talk about it. Is we've never introduced Cammy as a plushie before, so we're kind of really excited to bring her in too, because she is the other like voice of the game. It's like you have Squirrely Roo, and she's like your silent protagonist, but does like a lot of like your like interacting with people and like the movement, but Cammy does all of like the color mixing, and so that's like decidedly how you like solve puzzles and interact with the world is through her actions.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I was struck in particular by the visual art style. So Kyrstin, claps for you. Round of applause. I think absolutely the 2.5D lands really well. I think the watercolor sort of visuals land really well. I love the flip book or pop-up book thematic, I guess, as well. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how that came about and why you settled on that?
Sure. Yeah, when we were kind of starting on the thesis project, we were looking at other games for inspiration to kind of, just pull ideas from. And one of the big visual inspirations was,
Yoshi's Island?
Yoshi's Island, especially. So we definitely looked at that art style a lot, but we definitely wanted to keep it in kind of a 3D space.
Right.
That's kind of how the pop-up book came in. We were like, well, how do we kind of recreate a watercolor-esque style in a 3D world, and felt that kind of the 2.5D best represented that, and kind of making even the 3D models kind of look like paper craft. 3D. Yeah, like you took paper and then made it 3D.
Right. I remember like one of the things that we did was like we went and we brought in like a lot of like children's illustrated books like Winnie the Pooh, because we were like, we're making a story-based game and we have this like, fantastical like animal character. It just kind of makes sense to go the storybook route. And so I remember like we were bringing in like old books like from my childhood, and then our teacher brought in his SNES for us to play like the original Yoshi's Island. Like he was like, don't get like a like a ROM of it, like you should see how it like actually looked when I played it. And like one of our classmates brought in like some of their Paper Mario games. It was really cool. It was like a super, I don't know, like collaborative effort to like find research, which was really cool.
That's awesome. It's worth noting, this is mostly an aside, but it's worth noting that games really do look different on the actual console and the actual hardware, and play different for that matter, compared to ROMs. There's no sprite fading, there's no glitching. The actual CRT makes such a difference for old school games. And so, it's lovely that you had that connect to play an original SNES. I just got a Nintendo 64 again for the first time, and I've been playing all my old favorites. It's been great.
So cool.
Absolutely. So tell me a bit. I worked for a period of time on a game called Colored Squares. Very original title, I know. That was basically just it was almost a match 3 where you were mixing colors and trying to create very similar colors. I found it very difficult to make an algorithm work such that a computer and a human agreed on how similar two colors actually were. So I'm curious if you've had any difficulty with your color matching mechanic, and if there's anything you could give us, any insights that you've come up with as you build this color matching game.
Sure. I think like because we don't work within like shades of a color, like it's you have like one tone of your primary colors and one tone of your secondary colors. That's helped us a bit with the agreeing with it. I think like we have tweaked our colors over time, and now we use like what we call the Cammy standard. Since Cammy's the chameleon character who changes your color, And so every time like the colors appear in the game, they have to match that. I think our biggest struggle, I would say, the thing that comes to mind is in the tutorial level, we had a fence puzzle, and the color was orange. But because orange is a natural color for wood, people were struggling to identify that that was a puzzle, and so we ended up changing it out to purple. But I think that's something that we'll have to think about, especially like going forward, is like, and particularly with the color orange, like on wood, but like even like blue as it appears on things, that could be like levels of green. Like if it's a tree and you put it blue, it could just look like a different kind of tree.
Yeah,
you know?
For sure. Yeah, it was interesting to see how people kind of interpreted that to be like a brown fence instead of
Exactly.
orange. So for sure, making sure that the natural color of things isn't too close to what we want to change it to for people to interact with it.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah, the color language is a much bigger area of game design and visual design for that matter than some people may realize. We have so many like pre-baked notions on what different colors mean. You know, red means bad, green means good, blue means probably safe. But here you've discovered something that this naturally orange fence doesn't actually stand out because it's not something we're used to seeing as much, I think. Purple definitely catches your eye a little bit more, and is a color we use for all kinds of stuff, rare loot, etc. Love it. Interesting. So the next part about this is the actual Kickstarter. Creating wholesome games has wholesome is almost its own genre at this point. We just made a big genre chart, and we actually talked about using wholesome as its own category. So I guess actually before anything else, tell me about working on a wholesome game. What are some considerations for working on a wholesome game, and why did you choose to do it?
We love wholesome games. I don't know. I think that's just where we like trend as creators of games, but also players of games, and we wanted. I think, and this kind of gets into, the thing we're talking about later with like voices in games, is that we wanted to make games that we want to play and be able to like, help create an avenue for games that we want to play to exist. And, and I don't know, we like animals, we like bunnies and color. I mean, I think like we also like, getting to work on a video game. But one of the really great things that I love about video games is how it's like every form of art, but we were both raised traditional artists. And like a video game is very much not that. And I think like one of the great things about working with like watercolor as like the game of, or like as the style of our game, it's like it kind of is like a nod to like where we came from, but it's like it gives us the opportunity to still kind of like work with those things, even though we're like technically not.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I think we do an exercise sometimes called a filter list, which for the most part is just taking the game concepts you might work on and scoring them in a couple of categories and then comparing the score. And it's, that simple. But one of the categories we always have our students use is just personal excitement. Are you excited to work on this game? Because that winds up shining through. If you really love a concept or you're really into a specific kind of game, you're probably the right person to build that game. And if you don't love a game, you're probably not the right person to build that game, and you should, leave that to somebody else. So I like that part of your answer is just like, well, we like those games. Amazing.
Yeah, making games is hard, and so like, but we're so fortunate to be able to do it. But I'm like, why would I want to build something ourselves? Like we very intentionally like set out to make our studio when we started on the thesis project because we knew this is what we wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Like as long as we could do it, so it didn't really make sense to us to want to make a game that we didn't want to work on.
For sure, especially when games take anywhere from 1 to 5 or even more years. That's
right.
Like you kind of have to like love the project you're working on.
Yeah. To
stick with it that long.
Amazing.
Yeah, I would say like Swirly Root, like as a character, but like just as a concept is like our baby. Yeah. And so like even when things are harder, like we started rebuilding Squirrely Roo from the ground up during the pandemic. It's like we want her to exist in her like best, iteration. Like as we imagined, like the game that we wanted to make, we want to see that happen. And so like having that extra care is like a motivation to get there. Even when it's like you have to make hard decisions. Like, yeah, we did have to skip a lot of pre-production because of deadlines, but we could do this better if we just, went backwards a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I think speaking of having deadlines, you are currently in the middle of this Kickstarter, which I strongly encourage listeners to go check out. Their Kickstarter is like ubiquitous part of game development at this point, especially for indies. I think it's one of the few avenues that indies have to get money to be able to continue to work on their games. Your Kickstarter is semi-unique. One, it's just adorable. It's very wholesome. You should definitely go look at the page if nothing else, listener. But you also, like, one of the primary things you're advertising here and giving away as a reward tier is your plushies, which is unusual. That's not, like, typically how people sell video games. They don't make a whole other product being plushies in order to sell the game. So tell me about that decision. Like, why did you decide to do that, and how has it been panning out for you so far?
Yeah, we kind of decided to do the merch route a while ago. When we were at MICA, the Maryland Institute College of Art, they have a creative entrepreneurship grant that we applied for, and we decided to like split up what we got from that, which was half to dedicated hardware and software, so we could like get back to having the equipment that we need upon graduation. Because I know like Kyrstin's computer like literally could not run the animation programs that we were using to make Squirrely-Roo, and we had been like using the school computers for that, and so we were like, okay, let's get a new computer. Let's actually like get the licenses to like have these things. But then half of it we were like, we're gonna be an indie team, and this grant's gonna go away, and we're not gonna have money other than like what we're putting in, and let's make merch. Like, we're going to conventions anyway. We've, grown up going to conventions, and we know the artist alley. We're like, if we can just have merch there, we can bring money back, and so we won't always be dependent on, like, our ability to fund it, like, ourselves. And that way we can put more time into the game rather than, like, working outside jobs and, like, taking commissions and things like that. And so that kind of, like, was the creation of the Swirly-Roo plushie. And so, yeah, we made these little guys, and they
oh my god,
sold out earlier this year, and we were really sad about it. But that
wait, sad that they sold out?
I mean, we were happy that they sold out, but whenever we went to events, people were like, "Where's the plushie? Where can I get it?" And we were like, "It's awesome that it sold out. We have no more, and we don't know how to bring them back because an important detail to that, which is on the campaign page, is that when we got the plushies with the grant, that was pre-COVID. And so when COVID happened, how we had been selling the plushies, the amount for to manufacture them and ship them had skyrocketed. And so the money that we made back from selling the plushies couldn't actually buy new plushies. And so that was the sad part of that, until we were like, wait a minute, we want to kickstart physical copies of our game when we get to the end of development. Let's run a Kickstarter now and figure out how to do it, and we'll get our plushies back. We will make Cammy plushies so that they'll both exist. Yeah, so she has a functional pouch. Even like the original ones, they were made like ready to have Cammys, like should the plushies be popular, and we were just super excited to bring them back. And so now we're learning Kickstarter, so we know how we could like kickstart our game when we need to, and we'd love to see physical copies of it. But it's also like when we have the plushies, and it'll give us more things to take to events. So again, we can focus more on the game development rather than like taking, some outside jobs and things like that to like have the money to like fund our game being made.
When I went to Kickstarter for the first time, so listeners know this, you two probably don't know this. We made an AR board game a while ago, basically like D&D but with QR codes. And when I asked advice from smart Kickstarter people, they said, "Don't make that. Make a card game. That's way too much." And I promptly ignored that advice and released our game anyway. And it funded, but it was a lot of work. Oh my god. Do you have similar feelings? Are you happy that you created this plushie and added extra work on yourselves? Or are you like, maybe I wouldn't do that, thinking back?
Oh, I think we're very happy with the plushies.
Yeah.
Good.
I think of all the kind of the merchandise that we've made, I think this has both been I think our favorite, but then kind of everyone's favorite. They come up and they see the plushies.
Right.
They love her.
And I think too, one of the really nice things about making merch is you'll see most of the illustrated things Kyrstin makes, and a lot of the graphic design things. So more of the Boba Studios branded things I'll make, and it's really fun for us because we consider ourselves artists across the board. And so video games is a medium that we do, but it kind of Squirrely is a project that takes a long time because it's a video game, and so it kind of just lets us dabble in making other things. And sometimes for the Kickstarter, one of the tiers is handmade carrot plushies, and so the two of us are going to be making all of those that we're sending out, and that's a thing that we like doing, but we don't get to do it all the time. It's just sit down and do a sewing project, and so I think that's really fun for us.
For sure, yeah.
I feel like I've been running into more studios lately. I do you know what the Dunning-Kruger effect is? It's mostly unrelated, but kind of related.
No.
It's the inflection point where you learn enough to realize you know nothing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I feel like I've been going through my own Dunning-Kruger effect, where at first, when I was making games, I just made things because it was joyous. It was fun. And then I was like, okay, I got to get more serious if I want to actually make money. Let me learn the steps and the rules and what works for people. And that was right before getting over the edge of the Dunning-Kruger curve. Then I went over the edge and I was like, I think it's just about making things that are joyous and have some of these extra considerations. Yes, have a real target market, but people love it when you just make carrot plushies or whatever.
Right. And that's the exciting thing too about how wholesome games has become its own genre, as you said, because we could look at it hand making plushies isn't profitable for us, but we can also look at it people that play our game will want Squirrely to have her carrot. She's a bunny, and that makes it exciting and worth it for them, and so it makes it exciting and worth it for us to do. And we can leave the other stuff aside. Sure, it is gonna take its own amount of time, but it's, I don't know, we're here to bring this world to life together, and that's really what we want, and so we're excited to do that.
Love that. What a good statement. All right, so you, when we asked you what topic we should talk about for today's podcast episode, you mentioned the importance of bringing more voices into game development. So give me an introduction to that. What do you mean by that, and what do you want to say about it?
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think one of the really important things to us, Boba Studios, as a studio, is to see more women and people of color making games and having games that identify with them, that they can play, because when we did the pitch competition actually for Squirrely, the thing that we talked about the most was that games don't reflect the gamers, and you have 50% of gamers being women, but less than 20% are in the industry. The industry is less than 20% women, and even fewer are in leadership positions, and the numbers are still also incredibly low for people of color. And but if games are about telling stories and looking into other worlds and experiences, those are all valid experiences to make games and that people want to hear. And as somebody who might not be the majority, I might not connect as much with somebody who's had a life that is very, very different than my own. And so it's important to us to make games for people who look like us too, because we can give experiences for people to relate to. I think about the indie game Venba that just came out, about it's so much about Indian culture, which is my culture, and seeing that in a game is super cool, and seeing recipes that you might have grown up with, or that I don't know, that you just like know or like closely relate to your culture, even if you aren't Indian, but like you are like Southeast Asian or something like that. Like you don't get to see that as much, and that means a lot when you can see somebody else is telling a story. You connect with that in a different way when it's a story that's yours.
Mm-hmm. Amazing answer.
Great.
The two of them, for those listening, I think you can hear them a little bit, but the two of them are very politely asking each other who wants to speak, etc. It's a wonderful example of a partnership. I think so. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second because I want to give you more opportunity to talk about this. For those who are in a marginalized or less represented group, of course, there's value to seeing games that look like you. And I think that's a pretty clear correlation, seeing characters and seeing representation that matters to you a little bit more. But for those who are not in that group, because, it is still predominantly white dudes playing video games, why does it matter that we bring in more diversity? Like, why is it important to those people? And not just for white dudes. I don't mean to make it that specific, but why is it important to everybody? Even if a new character doesn't look like you, why is it still important that person exists, that character exists?
I think it's important as people too that we learn from other people's experience other people who are not like us. I mean, I think that just makes us more complete people. Especially when you can look at somebody who doesn't like you but understand, like, who they don't look like you but understand how they can be like you. I think, like, if white dudes, like, want to have games that, like, feel to them like they're telling their story, like, there is enough room in our industry for there to be both. Like, having one doesn't take one away from the other. I think that's, like, a really important thing to remember is that, like, we can have more game developers and have more game studios and have more games as a result without, like, taking away, from things that already exist. I think, like, a lot of our big studios are, like, already for white dudes, and they're not going to stop being, because if that's, who put the love into making it, then they're going to get their thing, and they should get their thing. But yeah, having something for one person doesn't take away from your experience, and sometimes people play video games even for, like, escapism, to see other things. And so, like, I don't know, I don't think it hurts for that other thing to be a different culture or a different person's life experience that's real, rather than something that's, like, completely, like, fantastical or, like, made up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fantastic answer. It is a I want to highlight a couple of things you said there because I think they're very important. One of the big ones is it doesn't take away. I don't know why that's sort of become the de facto argument against diversification. It's simple. There's more. The pie is bigger. We're not reducing the percentage for somebody else or something. There is just a greater variety of experience, and that is always good. Why not taste more? But the other part that I think is really important that you started to allude to there is just like you're seeing new shades of games. The game industry itself is becoming a wholer, deeper, bigger place, and as a result, all games prosper. All games get better. Quality, intrigue, features, mechanics become greater because more people, new types of people are experimenting, exploring, creating games, and playing games. So no matter who you are, I don't think there's any argument against getting more people to build games and new types of people to build games. Awesome. All right, let's jump into community questions. So we've got a couple. If you have any questions, I feel like there's more to be said about Kickstarter because that is such a massive confusing subject for so many people. Sure. I know it exhausted the heck out of me. I don't know how you two made it through. The question we're going to start with, though, is Joanna. So Joanna does not have a mic, so I'm going to answer for Joanna, or ask the question for Joanna. Joanna says, hello to both of you. Question for Kyrstin. How long did it take you to break into the art side of the game industry, and what path did you take?
That's a great question. I think it helped going to art school, I think, set me up with a lot of the skills that I'd need to kind of hop into that. but largely I kind of broke into that by starting a studio myself. So by kind of like creating that space for, you know, needing an artist of course on the team. It's kind of the path that I took. Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you recommend, this is a big one because a lot of people right now are struggling to get that first industry job, as has always been the case, but it's particularly not great right now. Is this a path, starting your own studio, that you recommend to everybody, or are there considerations that you feel like should lean you one way or another?
Yeah, I think I think one thing I would recommend to people if they do want to take this path is that it's definitely requires a lot of self-motivation. So it's not an easy path, but I think if, you know, you feel confident in doing it and you feel like you have that self-motivation to kind of keep driving you forward, then I think it would be a good path for you.
Yeah, I can absolutely echo that myself. Self-discipline is very hard when it's you yourself and I and you making games. But I also personally feel like mostly anybody can do this and should do this. Starting your own studio is just like such a wonderful, crazy experience. And even if it goes nowhere, number one, goes straight on your resume, definitely counts. And number two, it's just such a like unforgettable, life-changing experience.
For sure. Yeah, it's so rewarding, I think, too, to
Yeah.
kind of be able to run things yourself and,
Right.
you know, be able to decide basically everything. You know, we're a small team, so it's very easy to get all of our ideas heard and then make those happen, you know.
Yeah.
Very rewarding.
Amazing. Definitely. Any considerations actually to, before the next community question, but any considerations for starting a studio? Just some of the pitfalls you run into, maybe some of the things that you think are really important to do at the beginning.
Yeah, one of the things that I think that we kind of as a group stress that isn't like wouldn't be so popular, but I think has been helpful for us is that like when you start your own studio, do the stuff that you don't want to do, like legal, get that out of the way. Because you don't want it to be personal. You want it to be like when everybody is like excited and starting and like figuring that out, like that doesn't have to be like a question that you have to figure out later if something happens. Like if somebody, you know, wants to go work on a project, because like again, like we're artists, sometimes you want to move on to something else and explore something else, and it's not necessarily like, you know, personal or like for the team. It's just, you know, kind of how like the nature of working on long projects. And so when we get that done and out of the way, it's not really something that we have to think about because we have the answers. But I would absolutely echo what Kyrstin was saying too, with like, if you're going to, you know, take the path of starting the studio and like making a team, like making sure that like everybody is on the same page, you know, all times of what you want to do and where you want to go. And if, and like you have that like motivation to like build each other up, because like long-term projects are hard. And, you know, we all really need to be like all in for us to like get Boba Studios and get Squirrely Room off the ground, because it's like, it's definitely like a big thing that we're all still learning. I mean, like, you know, we both went to art school, but it's like, how do we figure out how to do our finances and our taxes and our social media marketing and all of like the other little things that nobody tells you that, you know, if you're a game dev, you need to know this, but if you're a game dev, you need to know this. And so we've been learning that, because I mean, of course, you don't know what you don't know. And so you kind of are like building the plane in the air and figuring out what that is and trying to get through it.
I love that. The so important to do paperwork like right away. Paperwork, not bad. Paperwork, good. Paperwork just means you're all on the same page and you're all agreeing to be on the same page. And it doesn't need to be scary. And I think some of what you're also talking about, though, the sort of softer side of it is really important too. Just like what are each of your goals? What are the shared goals that everybody has? What are you hoping happens with this game, with this company? And getting on the same page about that early on is a huge thing I'd recommend. I'm glad to hear you echo that. All right, we have Andrea on stage. Andrea, would you like to ask your question?
Hi. If it's okay, no, I I remember that I saw Boba Studios and I was like so in love with like the updates of your game and the Kickstarter and seeing other people from art school because I went there not to Micah but different school. It's just like really fun seeing other game devs be successful. I was curious that you brought up like a very interesting point about going to to conferences, and I'm going to move to like the Pennsylvania, which is why there's chaos in the background. And I would I would love to sort of like go to Maryland because that's where a lot of my friends in Firaxis Bit Reactor are in, and I'm wondering what conferences do you recommend for people like local to that area and sort of like pertaining to game development, like there's so many story-driven games. What personally do you recommend for people that want to stand out because that's something that you hear quite often in like a pitch, like story-driven, narrative focused? So I'm curious, like, what your process is to like really stand out and have like such an amazing Kickstarter and project going.
Thank you. Do you take this?
Sure. I can start with maybe like conferences.
Yeah.
So the one nice thing about in Maryland is that there are two major cities that are very close, like within an hour of each other. So DC and Baltimore. So definitely look out for anything that's happening in the DC or Baltimore area. We always go to like Otakon it's our like stylistic demographic, and they have a game room. And then there's of course MagFest, the music and gaming festival that happens in January. That's a very big gaming festival or gaming convention.
And they have a huge indie section. Yes. I know at one point they used to have the world's like largest indie showcase, and I don't know if that's still true, but it's definitely big.
For sure.
That's MagFest?
Yes, MagFest.
MAG.
Awesome. Okay.
It stands for Music and Gaming Fest.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that one would be a really good one for connecting with indies that can kind of. I think we get a lot of indies that come in from around the country too, so you can connect with people from a lot of places.
Right. There's too many games in Philadelphia.
Right.
Yeah, we're really close to DC and Baltimore, but we also like it's not too far to get to Philadelphia from where we are in Baltimore, or even New York. You can take a train directly to either. But yeah, Too Many Games in Philadelphia has its own indie section, but it's like only game focused, which is really interesting and like really fun.
For sure, yeah. And then this isn't a conference, but if you're kind of close to the Baltimore area, there's the Baltimore Indie Gamers group that I recommend joining. You can kind of connect with indie developers in the area and then talk with them directly.
I was having this conversation actually yesterday with another indie dev from Too Many Games who reached out to us, and they were saying like they haven't really gotten to meet a lot of other indie devs, and we're wondering like how we meet devs. And I said, I think one of the things about conventions is it's great to go to conventions and meet other devs, but you're also busy showing your game during it. It's hard to get to know them. And that's where I recommend, like you said, the big group, Big Indie Games, or Baltimore Indie Games, and IGDA, the International Game Developers Association. Like, these are meetups, like, for game devs to come together and, like, learn stuff, share stuff, and we go to both IGDA's DC and Baltimore chapters. I'm not saying that you have to go to both. DC is far more indie-friendly. Baltimore is a great place to network because there are so many game devs in the area. Firaxis, big, huge games, Bethesda, they all come to the Baltimore chapter. And so it's a great place to meet other devs that you can get to know later. But I think like having some of those meetups and some of those community groups definitely would be a way that I would recommend, like meeting indie devs, because sometimes when you're just at the event, there's just so much to do where you meet names and you see their faces, but then you don't really get to like chat or see what they're working on for yourself.
For sure.
Right. No, that's super helpful. Thank you. And like it may sound weird, but like is the Baltimore or the DC chapter kind of like gatekeeping away, because I feel guilty because it's like I'd be living in Pennsylvania, but I'd love to visit the city quite often. So would it be okay to like join the group anyways?
Absolutely. I think both groups are very open to other people. I mean, honestly, there's so many people in the Baltimore group that I don't think they would even notice, to be honest. In the DC group, we consider, and I say we, partially because Kyrstin and I are both on the board of that chapter, but partially because it's kind of the whole ethos of the group since COVID is just that anyone is welcome. We meet virtually and in person. And so once a month we do in person, once a month we do virtually, because during the pandemic our like membership kind of became very global, and people like even from other countries were coming, and we were like, we don't want people to stop coming because they're not meeting us in person, so we're going to do that. So I think absolutely, like, just show up and go. If there's a speaker too, nobody's ever going to like tell a dev to stay away because they're coming to learn. So it's really like not about having to be in the community, but like expanding like what community looks like.
Right. Thank you so much, really. I hope you don't mind that I was taking notes. And yeah, I look forward to joining the big Discord server in IGDA chapter.
Thank you. And if you need those, feel free to DM us too.
Yeah.
I think there was a and we could send you those links. There was a second part of the question I think that we missed.
I was just wondering, wait, I have a bad memory. Oh yeah, what advice do you have for game developers that are interested in making story-driven games, but with a desire to stand out amidst like either narrative-driven, story-driven, since it's such a common like phrase that you see in pitches quite often?
I think my advice would be for that is just be like unabashedly yourself. I think there are a lot of story driven games, but there are also like a lot of any type of genre. Like, having it be story based is basically like just another, genre point for you. And it's more about like, what story your game is telling, who those characters are, and those are the things that get us invested and to love it. And it can be like your aesthetic. I think, with Squirrely Roo, we go to a lot of indie game events, and sometimes the aesthetic of the game that we show is so much different than the other games that are in the room, in a way that we've had people come up to us and they're like, I don't know what this is, but I saw it from across the room and it looked so different, I had to come over. And sometimes I think it's a little bit shocking, but we're not, like, Squirrely Roo is never going to be anything else other than what it is, and we're not going to like advertise it as such. So I think, like, when you find the thing that you want to make, lean into that. And like, that's what going to be like how people who will love that and love your game for what it is, that's how they'll find you, is that they'll see, all of the parts of it that make it special.
Sure. And I think like focusing, I think, less on like what it is you're making, like rather than like advertising it as just story and narrative based. You can kind of focus on like why you're making it, and I guess that's the thing that people tend to connect with is like why is your story important? Like, what are you telling that people might connect with?
Right.
And then kind of hook onto that.
Right. One of the things that we try to do too with our game, because it is story based, is if somebody asks us for a description of it or share a description for like, an event or something, we have a version of our description that we prefer, and then a version that is if somebody asks us for it, and we do story forward and mechanics forward. And because our game is a story based, given the option, we will always share it story forward, where it'll like give you a synopsis of like what it is that's happening, and then follow it with what kind of a game it is, unless somebody like specifically asks us to like talk about this genre or something, and then we might put that first. And you can like kind of figure out how, like, what is best for your game in the way that you like describe it or advertise it, because yeah, like in learning Squirrely Roo's story, we think it's better for us if people hear what her story is rather than that it has a story. If that makes sense.
It makes sense, and I'm very grateful that you highlighted like essentially being unabashedly yourself, because in the past I'm from Colombia, and I have received the advice of like you need to sort of like cater to the public, cater to the general audience rather than like being unabashedly yourself. So like hearing like successful stories that, we can be ourselves and not sort of like fall into the status quo is very like uplifting and inspiring.
Thank you.
Love that. I think what I feel like I heard from that to add is like being opinionated about the game too. Like not necessarily being divisive or anything or political or something, but meaning, this is a cute, wholesome game about a bunny, and that's what we want, and that's what it is. Um, Much like you're saying, Andrea, sort of being unabashedly yourself. We made a change to Tailmore at one point where in our world magic is highly illegal. And we got pushback from parts of our team because they were like, well, we want to have magic in the world. Like, if we make it illegal, that's going to make it crappier. Um, but that was clearly a good change that players appreciated because it made the world a little more interesting. It was an opinion about our world, as opposed to trying to cater to everybody or trying to make something that sort of fit the formula. Although magic is illegal is maybe fairly popular. But yeah, opinionated about your narrative. Actually have a choice that your narrative is trying to tell.
Absolutely, like you said, like catering to everybody. I think one piece of advice that we've been told, or just like heard about other games, is that if you try to cater to everybody, you will cater to nobody.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, remember that, like, the people that are interested in like what you're making are going to like it for what it is, and everyone else, like, like the status quo, are going to find games that match what they are. And so, like, just, I don't know, be yourself and make your game and let people know that. And if those points shine, people will find it.
This is what the game is. All right, we have time for one last question. Misha, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. You can hear me?
Yep.
So there's just with looking at the art style in the game, like I really like the way you incorporated the kind of more basic kind of 2D and with 3D, and like I was kind of wondering how you approach that and what was like a technical challenge with that, and like do you think like as you continue to develop the game you'll I guess continue with that aesthetic, or will you like change it up a bit, or do you think like what's made the player basis like enjoy that aspect as well?
That's a great question. I think as far as like the technical challenges go, kind of like setting up not unspecified, but like rules for you as the designer as to like what is 2D and what is 3D,
like
I think helps.
Rules?
Yeah, kind of an unspoken rule where like, people might notice that, but they also might not. And generally it's like better that they don't notice. But like for us, for example, we'll make sure that like any characters are 2D specifically so that we can use sprites and kind of keep that file size down, as opposed to using like bigger models with higher poly counts. And then same with the papercraft, we can kind of get away with using smaller, like lower poly models to kind of keep the game optimized as well as we can.
I think one thing to remember too is that characters always stand out. People look for the people they can interact with, and those people aren't necessarily human. Like in our game, it's all it's all animal characters. So people look for people that they can interact with, so they stand out in a way that like 3D models might stand out. And so having those be the 2D, like the papercraft, the paper dolls in our world, helps the world stand out a little bit more, I think, too, because I think if the characters were created in a style that would also be like a lot more complex, like visually, that would draw your attention, it might take away a little bit from how much you're looking at the world around you. And having like those like papercraft models for the environment are like a great way to like bring attention to the world that you're in.
For sure.
One of the unspoken rules too is to have the all of the interactable parts of the world to be a 3D papercraft model, and the like ones that you don't interact with but they're like part of the environment art to be also to be a paper doll. Right. And so when it's flatter, it's like you don't interact with it as much and it kind of recedes into your field of vision, versus if it's like big and molded in this space, and then it's like that's the thing that you interact with.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I really like you guys, like when you just said about the status quo. So at least you're kind of trying to go above that by not just going the traditional route of all 3D or all 2D. So thank you for that.
I've worked on exactly a single 2.5D game, and it was awesome. All right. Thank you, Misha, for the question. So this means we are just about at the end of the day, but Oh, wow. Time for the question of the day, which is where we reiterate one of the most important points that we learned from the Boba Studios team to try to make sure we remember it better. The question I've got for the audience, the first person to answer this gets 1 House Cup point. Type it in the chat. The question I've got for the audience is, what is the one thing that the Boba Studio team recommends you do when you're starting an indie studio? What are the most important things they recommend you do right at the beginning? I see Color Optimist typing. Paperwork! Yes, Starwall, you've nailed it. Yes, indeed. Get your ducks in a row, do some paperwork. It's not scary, it's good. Starwall, let us know which house you want to give that point to. All right, we are at the end of the episode. Thank you so much for being here. We've got 2 things that I want to ask of you first before we say goodbye. The first one is some homework. And this is something we do on this podcast every episode. What is a homework assignment that you want to give to the audience to practice something that you gave us today? So perhaps it's about, the importance of bringing more people into the gaming world. Perhaps it's about creating wholesome games, starting a studio, Kickstarter. What is a homework assignment you could give us that we could do over the next week or so?
Say the first thing that comes to my mind, and you can have a different assignment, is that as indies, as game developers, as artists, as even if we're not just indies, even if we were to get jobs in the AAA space, right? We're all in this together. We all live in a culture that underappreciates art and artists, and so therefore, like, we don't need to tear each other down or compete with each other. Like, we all want to make the thing that makes us happy and put that out in the world and have people see it. And so my homework would be to, if you learn something about making games, or if you notice that someone else doesn't know something or needs help with something, share it with them. We had somebody message us yesterday who was like, I am starting my Kickstarter campaign and I don't know, like, what to do. I don't know how to interact with my followers about it. And we were like, this is the message that we've used. And then this is a message that we've used in this different situation. And this is the other thing. And we're like, these words are not precious to us. Our game is. And getting our game funded is. But the words are not. And, like, use that. It doesn't matter if we're making 2 different games and funding 2 different games. Like, our players are going to come to us and their players are going to go to them. And, the things that we learn about Kickstarter they're not secrets. Kickstarter is a public thing that exists outside of us. And so, if you can help another dev, if you can lift up another person, do that, because we can all have more games if we all, like, exist together. And I mean, and that stuff comes back to you. If you help somebody, someone's going to help you, and then all of our games can just be better.
Mm-hmm. But I love that beautiful homework assignment. So I'm going to reiterate that to make sure people understand. So your homework assignment over the next week is to find one person to uplift and or support. Offer them actual advice, something that you know that they may not know, or perhaps give them a pat on the back, tell them they can do it. Sometimes that's all people need. All right, so we're definitely at the end. Is there any last thing you want to say or anything you'd like to plug here at the end of the episode?
I guess our Kickstarter would be a great thing if you'd check it out. And that doesn't mean that you have to, like, provide a monetary pledge. If you can't do that, just sharing the word, getting it out there, letting people know. If you do want to back and take one of these little ladies home, like, we have Squirrelers that we're really excited to bring to life. We have Camis that we're really excited to bring to life, and we have a lot of really cool stretch goals if we do get lucky enough to meet our goal. Like, we are working on making Squirrelyroo hooded blankets. Yes. And they're going to have snaps so they can go around your wrist, so you can type at your computer or draw at your computer, and you will be warm. And, like, you can't see it, but the air vent in our apartment is, like, right in our office space, and so we like our apartment colder, but then when you're working under the computer for a long time, you're like, I'm freezing. And so we were like, let's bring Squirrelyroo rabbit hooded blankets to life. And so that's one of our big stretch goals.
That's awesome. I think it is I love people who just fully lean into whatever the heck gets them excited. And y'all are clearly doing that. So thank you so much for being here. To Ashley and Kyrstin, this has been a fantastic episode. Thank you listeners for listening, and those who asked questions for asking questions. As always, we'll be here again Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. There are links to join us down below, so come on and join us for the next episode. And of course, I'm gonna say this one more time to everybody: go to the Kickstarter right now if you can. Back them. If you can't, share it around with other people. We will see you next week. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.